if I was sitting down at the table with the Pope and I had to convince him that I don't think Jesus really was resurrected from the dead, or that there really was a Garden of Eden, forget about it. I just would lose. I'm just not going to change his mind.
What are the thinking traps and the biases that people on the progressive side of things can get stuck in that isn't doing them any favors, that they think they're too smart to get stuck in, or believe they're immune to?
A failure to ever sit down for a few seconds and understand the arguments for non-leftist position. Tribalism, insularity. If everyone you know agrees with you, then you may never be exposed to countervailing arguments. Laughter is a way of generating common knowledge. Make it publicly known what used to be privately known. One trigger, one spark can ignite the whole group.
Firstly, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Mate, I have a lot to talk to you about in a little amount of time. There's at least something that Stephen Picker and I have in common. It's not a Leica, but it's a Canon 7 rangefinder.
Oh, a range
with a 0.95.
Oh my goodness,
dream lens on the front.
That's an awesome lens. That is less than f1. That's the fastest lens that there is. That's fantastic.
It was the fastest at the time.
Yes.
I bought it when I was still working in television with pre-GFC TV money.
I think it still is the fastest. I mean, tied with the Leica Noctilux. But it doesn't get any faster than 0.95. That's a beauty.
The problem is that my hands, as I get older, my hands get shakier, Stephen. So
well, let me tell you, it doesn't get any better.
I'm so immensely grateful for the work you've done, Stephen. Just on a personal note, Better Angels of Our Nature was such a glorious book, and it came along at a time in my life when I was kind of courted, I guess, by a lot of what you talk about in Common Knowledge. The ideas of not necessarily conspiracy, but why should I believe it? I'm just asking questions. And I was slipping down that slope when my dear friend, the great scientist, Dr. Ruben, he's not a doctor, Ruben Meerman, he's a great science educator here in Australia. He turned me onto your work. It was later on when I read Enlightenment Now that I was going through a terrible time of intense climate anxiety, like to the point I was on antipsychotics and stuff. I was very, very ill. And when I read that book, the idea that there was someone out there who was so smart and was proposing ideas of a future that wasn't what my doom brain was telling me gave me this little window of hope that it might not be, because it's very convincing when you're that ill that you believe it to be true. But when I read that book, it just gave me such a window of light. And I just got to thank you so much.
I appreciate that. And what you say is absolutely true, of course. When you are in the midst of a depression, the world objectively looks hopeless. It's not like and it's very hard to think, oh, that's just the way I'm seeing it right now in my current mental state. It's just the way the world actually appears to you. And that is one of the things that make depression so hard to get out of. You can be given all these reasons, but they just don't ring true when you're in that state.
Which kind of leads me to, the Better Angels of Our Nature was just such a landmark book. But what's it like to be the guy who shows up with a data set that says, oh no, actually the world is more peaceful than ever before, and today more people escaped extreme poverty than any other day in history, including yesterday? Because look, I'm not you, but on occasion I have encouraged, with robust data sets, both my current wife and my ex-wife, hey, just calm down, okay? And it's never gone well.
No, right. Well, it can. I mean, as you say, when you noted that it changed your own mental state. If people are open, if they're receptive, sometimes if they just see the graphs, or even if they're reminded of things that they knew all along, like, would you prefer your surgery with or without anesthesia? Or have you seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail? Remember that's really what life was like. And people, they kind of know that at the same time, but you're reading the headlines every day. It's hard to remember that.
But people can often have their identity welded to some of these things. I worked with a guy who was he was a super smart man, but he was an intense climate denier. Any kind of evidence that we would try to talk to him about, it was just rebuffed with this aggression. And I'm sure that when you bring these things to people, they may not be as receptive as one might imagine. Why is that? Why does data make us go, oh, no, that can't be true, even though it is?
Yes. Sometimes graphs can change people's minds. There are studies that show that even in politically touchy issues, some people do change their mind when they see the data. But very often, as you say, people, if they're emotionally invested in a hypothesis, they'll just filter all the evidence through the lens of what supports what I believe. That is, do I have to believe it? Can I figure out ways where I don't have to believe it? That's the natural attitude that to be honest, most of us take about things that are important to our sense of self, the causes that we've devoted ourselves to, the who we think of as our friends, who we think of as our enemies. That kind of belief, when it becomes tribal, when it becomes defines the people that you want to be affiliated with, then it's hard to unshake it. That's one of the most robust of all of the biases that cognitive psychologists have documented in people.
What can we do if we find ourselves in that situation and we, the whole line, if you can't spot the fish at the poker table, it's you.
Yes.
What can we do if we find ourselves in that situation?
There's no guaranteed way out. There's no, you may not succeed. If I was sitting down at the table with a pope and I had to convince him that I don't think Jesus really was resurrected from the dead, or that there really was a Garden of Eden, forget about it. I just would lose. I'm just not going to change his mind. So you can't have the goal of changing everyone's mind. Some people you won't. But there are people who are open to argument for particular issues. There are people where they might reject it, but there could be a sleeper effect as more and more evidence that they can't avoid starts to pile up. The day may come when they flip. And, there are new babies being born all the time who don't come into this world with opinions on climate change or the cause of COVID or anything else. And you're going to try to appeal to them.
It's magnificent to dig into the new book, which is about the idea of common knowledge, which I've been, my son Wolfgang, he's 6. He was asking me who I'm speaking to today, and we were talking about the idea of common knowledge. And we were explaining it like when I was putting it to bed last night, it's like down at the beach. Like we all know that everyone should swim between the flags down at the beach because that is the safe place to swim. And so if we see anyone swimming outside the flags, they're probably either A, a very strong swimmer, or B, not from here and probably going to get in a lot of trouble. And so people go out of their way to go, hey, you should swim over there. We do try to encourage people to swim in the right spot. But it's a concept particularly powerful here in Australia because as much as we like to say we're a larrikin nation descended from the convicts and the people who imprisoned them, we really don't like it when someone does the wrong thing.
Yes. No, that is true about, having been to Australia a number of times and studied, a little bit. People are proud of having descended from convicts, but it actually is a pretty civilized society. That is, the rate of violent crime in Australia is pretty low. You haven't had too many, civil wars or revolutions or
we haven't had any
or riots. Yeah, that's what I mean. So it's
there have been riots, but comparatively, it's an incredibly safe,
Well, and I come from a kind of similar country. I'm Canadian, so a fellow citizen of the Commonwealth, or as they used to call us, a fellow British subject. That was printed on my first passport. And
Yes.
Unlike my adopted country, we didn't achieve our independence through a violent revolution. And we're, there's no such thing as a perfect society, a utopia. We can do much better than any existing society on Earth now. But still, if you grade on a curve, if you compare places to live, both Australia and Canada are pretty nice places. And they do well in objective indicators of human well-being: long lifespan, low rate of violent crime, low child mortality rate, high levels of educational achievement, at least relative to the rest of the world. That's why so many people want to get in.
Yes, the idea of that common knowledge is a way that unspoken barriers to our community exist. We all know that we shouldn't smoke here in this restaurant. And so if someone's smoking, as you've described, you tap someone on the shoulder and point at a sign because we all know we shouldn't do it. Yet I've noticed something in Australia since the COVID lockdowns. I think you've been here since then. The idea that we're a nation of dobbers, let me explain what that word means to you, a snitch or a tattletale. Oh. We have been starting to report on our neighbours far more, and there's a lot more curtain twitching and street watching going on since the COVID lockdowns. And I'm wondering how you might see how common knowledge and what might play into that and what might be happening to us as a community to start doing more of that sort of thing?
Yeah, that can have a downside. I mean, it's a good thing if you're reporting heinous abuse, if there's child abuse, if there's widespread deep graft and corruption, then there is a role for informants. But it can lead to a 1984 like dystopia where there's no more private sphere. And I do write in the last chapter of the book, which I call Radical Honesty, Rational Hypocrisy, that we're not crazy for being hypocritical in some ways. So some things that I'm going to make a big assumption here. I might be wrong, but you probably say some things to your wife that you wouldn't say to, a friend, a stranger, a colleague, a coworker.
Yeah,
there's probably some,
of
I'm going to guess there might be a little bit of politically incorrect humor in the household, a little bit of gossip, even about people that you really like. It's just what can bond people. And you, since we all know that we're only human and that other people are only human, we kind of know that our friends, almost certainly gossip about us. Why should they be any different? But it's probably a good thing that we don't actually hear that gossip, because a friendship is based on an assumption which is strictly speaking false, which is that you're perfectly loyal to your friends. You would do anything for them, infinitely generous, infinitely respectful. And that's true up to a point, and the friendship is based on the assumption that it's completely true. And it's probably good for the friendship if you don't challenge that by blurting stuff out. That is making it common knowledge. Likewise, in a marriage, people have thoughts about their spouse, or even have thoughts about people who are not their spouse, that you kind of, if you're not naive, your spouse also is thinking. But again, you're probably better off not voicing all of them and not making them common knowledge. Now, some couples can get away with it. They just blurt out everything. Most, you want to prop up the assumption that a marriage is all for one, one for all, total loyalty, infinite generosity, because that's the actual basis. And that itself is common knowledge. That is, it because the other person knows that that they know that you know it, and that's what holds us together.
I realized when I was getting ready for this that, and I know we shouldn't compare our insides to another person's outsides, but I am the age you were when you wrote the blank slate. And I'm thinking, what am I doing with my life? So I was like, but come on, like at one point we were both teenagers, at one point we were both little boys. And in that book, you talk about a time when you were a teenager in Montreal, and to tie that in with the latest book, Common Knowledge, you were a teenager in Montreal at a very moment when the breakdown of something that had been formerly common knowledge, that is the police are there, vanished. And I'm wondering if you might, explain what that was like and how that changed the way you look at the world.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was 14 years old, and hell, it was the late 60s. There were a lot of romantic beliefs going around, including that we should all be anarchists, that the police are unnecessary, the police actually cause crime by forcing everyone to delineate.
You don't know anything, Mom and Dad. It's our time.
Okay, so you've anticipated the rest of the conversation. My belief was put to a test in Quebec, where I grew up. I don't know if it's true in Australia. There are an awful lot of strikes, including public sectors. The nurses go on strike, and the letter carriers go on strike, and the firefighters go on strike.
It's a very French thing to do.
Actually, no, I think you're right. It's probably a more French thing. Well, one day the police went on strike. And what do you think happened with all of these, polite, civilized Canadians? Well, riots broke out. There was a looting. Every downtown store window was smashed. There was a fatal shooting, until they called in the Mounties to restore order. So this was a rather dramatic test of this, admittedly rather juvenile belief. And I've cited it a couple of times to make the point that the as unpopular as the police have been in the United States recently, we really do rely on them to prevent much worse mayhem. Not only because they deter people from attacking, robbing, raping, killing, but since so much violence, especially in the U.S., is gang violence. One gang against another, and they're one gets shot, then there of course has to be revenge, and there has to be revenge against the revenge, and revenge against the revenge against the revenge. If you know that the police are deterring your enemies, then you don't have to be such a badass yourself and defend your own interests and intimidate them and have revenge against them. You kind of outsource your revenge to the police and the court system.
It was such a powerful picture of this idea that, like, if the police actually had to go out and truly make sure that everything was okay, you would need one police person for every citizen.
Right.
But because of the existence of common knowledge that we all know we have this justice system that our taxes pay for, and there are consequences to behavior, we kind of keep in line. And as someone who's a great scholar of evolutionary reasons for our psychology, I'm wondering, is the idea of common knowledge, the concept of the shared story among community and shared consequences, is that one of the reasons we got this successful as a species?
Yes. This is a point made by the best-selling author Yuval Noah Harari in his book *Sapiens*. He argued that what makes humans so successful is he calls them fictions, things that exist but they aren't made out of stuff. I would say they are conventions that are held up by common knowledge. That is, they exist because people know that other people know that other people know they exist. So a government, for example, government's not the same as the parliament buildings. They could be in an office building and it'd still be the same government. A corporation, a religion, currency, a university, a nonprofit, especially nowadays when so many institutions are not physical, they just live in cyberspace. In what sense do they exist? Well, they really do exist. There really is such a thing as Microsoft. There really is such a thing as France. There really is such a thing as the euro. They exist because they're conventions held in place by common knowledge. They exist because everyone thinks they exist, and that can make them exist. There really is such a thing as a euro, not that, and that's the fact that everyone knows that everyone knows that everyone knows that it's a carrier of value is enough. Likewise, as you say, no government has the firepower to intimidate every last citizen. But if in good times you accept the legitimate authority of the government, you just know you do what, it's the law, you have no choice, you got to do it. And you know that your fellow citizens behave the same way, so that you're not the sucker, you're not the only one who's not pilfering or shoplifting, that it applies to everyone else, so you can afford not to be the sucker, then that's how power is held up. But conversely, that's also how power can be threatened, how you can get regime change. If everyone shows up in a public square and everyone sees everyone else opposing the government, and they rise up en masse, then no government can intimidate every last one of them. They can storm the palace, they can bring the machinery of the state to a halt through work stoppages and strikes. And this was Gandhi's key idea. In the movie, I don't know if the man actually ever said this, but his character in the movie said to a British colonial officer, "In the end, you will leave because 150,000 Englishmen simply cannot control 350 million Indians if the Indians refuse to cooperate." Now, that cooperation or lack of cooperation is a matter of common knowledge. That is, even if I'm disgruntled with the regime, if I don't know that everyone else is, and I don't know that everyone else knows that everyone else is, there's nothing I can do about it. If I were to show up in a public demonstration and seeing everyone wanting to storm the palace, then that could give you safety in numbers. And there have been revolutions, such as in Romania in 1989, when Nicolae Ceausescu held a public rally, which he thought the adoring masses would come out to worship the exalted leader. One guy in the front started to jeer and heckle, and then it became contagious, and then he was facing an angry mob of 100,000 people. Within a couple of days, the regime fell, and he was lit. Yeah. He was dead, strung up on a lamppost. And this is what dictators are terrified of, and I guess all leaders. Yeah. And that's why you don't have freedom of assembly in a dictatorship. You don't have freedom of the press, because another way to generate common knowledge, to make it public what everyone might be privately feeling, is through a widely circulated manifesto or op-ed. I recount a joke from the old Soviet Union, a man handing out leaflets in Red Square. Of course, the KGB arrest him and bring him back to headquarters, only to discover the leaflets are blank sheets of paper. They confront him, what is the meaning of this? And he says, what's there to say? It's so obvious. So the point of the joke was he was generating subversive common knowledge. That is, the citizens of the Soviet Union, they all knew that the regime was inefficient and cruel and oppressive, but each one may have thought that they were the only one, that everyone else was happy, or they may even have thought that everyone else was aggrieved the way they are, but they didn't know that everyone else was. And so everyone just kept their misery to themselves. By just making it public, making it common knowledge that there's a reason to oppose the regime, that can unite people in opposition and can really bring down a regime.
You wonderfully weave humor into your work amidst all the very, very dense, is Choo-Choo got a better idea than such and such. Amid all that, there's you put a couple of really great gags in there, Stephen. And, it's interesting because you mentioned the gag about the Soviet Union. My father grew up in Prague, and jokes were he escaped in '68.
Oh.
Jokes were a huge way, and humor. Both my parents are doctors as well. Like, not only was it a huge way of my dad to deal with the loss of his country, he used to say this one, when the Germans came in 1939, we sent a message to the Red Army. They turned up in '68 and went, sorry, Will. I mean, you got tanks rolling down the street, crushing people. Like,
yeah, no. There was a rich vein of humor in the Soviet Union. That's a great example. Or another one is, what is the definition of capitalism? It's the exploitation of man by man. What is the definition of communism? The exact opposite.
But what we're doing here, these aren't particularly funny jokes. It's not a knock, who's there. But humor and satire have always played a role. They seem to have almost this superpower. It's the dye in the ointment of spoiling entire water supply. Why is it that humor is able to crack a veneer so effectively where like an op-ed can't? And what role do you see satire having in helping us get through this particularly weird strongman time?
Yes, well, I do, and I do discuss that in a section of When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows on humor, where I talk about everyday generators of common knowledge in our nonverbal communication. The chapter is called Laughing, Crying, Blushing, Staring, Glaring. Expressions that I think are generators of common knowledge. And laughter is one of them. If you laugh, you know you're laughing. It's interrupting your breathing. Other people know you're laughing because they can hear the ha ha ha, and and they know that you're laughing, and so on. What laughter does is it makes some weakness or infirmity or indignity of the butt of the humor common knowledge. That is, everyone may have known that someone had feet of clay, they were weak, they were foolish, but when you make a joke and people laugh, and the laughter itself is contagious, and anyone who gets the joke is suddenly not only aware of the target's weakness, but aware that everyone else is aware, and aware that everyone else is aware of the awareness. And often by hiding the insult, the dig, the attack in a joke where it's not stated explicitly, but if you didn't know that, you wouldn't get the joke. The fact that you laugh, and laughter is largely involuntary as well as being contagious, shows that you knew it all along. When the laughter happens, then everyone who knew it all along knows that everyone else knew it all along.
I work a lot live on stage, and I did a show a couple of years back. I would always, whenever city I was in, I would call someone that I know is a particularly dark person, and I say, "Could you come along? I'll give you a free ticket." Because if I could get them to laugh at the first really dark thing in the first minute or two of the gig, it was fine. Yeah. Because that gave everyone this like big laugh early on at the first like really dark thing. Everyone's like, "Oh, cool, we're okay to laugh at this." But if that wasn't there, it was always hard.
Well, no, that's interesting because if I suggest laughter is a way of generating common knowledge, making it known make it publicly known what used to be privately known, and if the actual laughter sound is what spreads that message, then because it's contagious, I don't have to, this is a cliche, the timing is everything, but also sometimes one trigger, one spark can ignite the whole group. And that's why in American sitcoms, until recently, there was a laugh track, canned laughter, artificial laughter. Why I've heard that comedy clubs, I don't know if this is an urban legend or a true story, but sometimes hire someone who has a big, raucous, rowdy laugh to get the audience going. And the rim shot, bada bing, I think that's back from vaudeville, that staccato sound, which sounds a bit like a laugh, can get everyone going. And it can also be a timing signal, so that everyone knows when to laugh, and therefore the contagion can become a chain reaction. And sometimes dark humor can also bond people in similar circumstances where some of the things that they may have feared were private. Like, am I the only one who sometimes gets burned out, who's sometimes cynical?
Yeah.
When that is shared within a tight circle, then that set of people, if they get the joke, that means they now know that something that they've been privately thinking, their peers have been thinking as well. Of course, if it escapes that circle, then there can be trouble as people who haven't experienced it themselves just take it on face value and just assume that this is a cruel, callous person.
And I know you've been the target of some of this stuff, but in your work, you also explore the whole idea of someone being cancelled because of, yes, they made a joke, a dark joke, which was supposed to bond or whatever, but another person was offended on behalf of someone else, and then there was a catastrophic pile-on. And I'm wondering, you grew up in Canada, and I'm sure it happens in the States as well, but when it comes to common knowledge about who gets cancelled and who stays cancelled, for some reason, our athletes, high-profile athletes, are under a different set of rules. We have this in Australia, for footballers at least, we have this grub to goal ratio. Like if you've scored a few more goals than how grubby you are, you're fine. Or wanker to wickets. Like if you've scored if you've taken a couple more 100 wickets than how many people you've cheated on your wife with, we'll always remember you as a great cricket player. And how does the common knowledge play into, like, we all know they should not have done that terrible thing to that person. Oh, yeah, but then there was that amazing goal they scored in the grand final.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's so much a case of common knowledge as just two things pulling in opposite directions. Namely, you really do want a good athlete on your team, and the part of you that enjoys sports wants that. The part of you that has some kind of moral standards, or in the case where sometimes there's a scandal, it's not that immoral, but it's just a scandal. Because it violates some kind of propriety, and there are fewer and fewer of those, then to signal that you actually believe that there is such a thing as moral and social norms, then part of the dynamic of outrage and cancel culture is that if someone breaches a norm in a public setting where the breach is common knowledge, everyone sees it or hears it, everyone knows, therefore, that everyone else has heard and seen it, for the norm to survive, given that it isn't policed, and you can't be thrown in jail for a tasteless joke or something, then people who want to uphold that norm, who are worried that if it's flouted in public, it will just unravel, because it only exists to the extent that people think it exists. If people no longer think it exists, it doesn't exist. If you want it to continue to exist, then the violator has to be punished in some public arena. And so you get the social media mobbing and piling on, where everyone tries to disgrace the person in order to keep the norm a norm. And it has to be public. It's got to itself go viral to negate the public threat that triggered it in the first place.
I would like to imagine that people who buy your books, me being one of them, people who go to your lectures and go to your events, possibly fall more towards the center or the progressive side of politics? What are the thinking traps and the biases that people on the progressive side of things can get stuck in that isn't doing them any favors, that they think they're too smart to get stuck in or believe they're immune to?
Part of it is a failure to ever sit down for a few seconds and understand the arguments for non-leftist positions, such as why markets are beneficial, that they make people both richer and freer and happier, why there may be reasons why groups differ in their outcomes that aren't just due to external racism, that there may be cultural traits that certain ethnic groups have that they carry with them wherever they go and that determine their success or failure independently of the way they're treated. That there may be positive reasons why you want a criminal justice system and police. So I think a lot of there may even be reasons to keep traditions like sexual propriety that may seem to have no rational basis at all, but might just be ways that our species has managed to avoid slipping into chaos, even if we don't understand them. The fact they've survived so long, there may be some rationale for them. They're kind of classical arguments for certain conservative positions that I suspect a lot of people on the left would not even be able to articulate, that is to set them up so they could say what's wrong with them. They just would not, and it's considered to be, by the way, this goes both ways. It's also true for the right when it comes to left-wing positions. It's just kind of human nature. It's often considered to be a sign of rational discourse, of civil discourse, that you be able to state your opponent's position in a fair-minded way that they themselves would agree to. It's like, yep, you just specified exactly what I believe.
To steel man their arguments.
To steel man their arguments, exactly. So it's an absence of steel manning that is a good habit of rationality. It can come from tribalism, insularity. If everyone you know agrees with you, then you may never be exposed to countervailing arguments. And of course, it happens on both sides and may even be getting worse as there is more segregation of people, where educated and younger people tend to gravitate to urban areas. Less educated tend to stay in rural areas. Institutions that used to bring people together across these divides, like churches, like service organizations, like the Rotary Club and the Masons and the Shriners, the Army in days when there was conscription, when you were in the Army together with people that were not like you. Those have eroded, and people more and more tend to hang out with people like themselves, which I think is what has encouraged some of the polarization that we see.
Oh, that's it. I'm starting a secret society, if only for the handshakes and the cool little aprons. That's
the Masons. Yes, my grandfather tried to get my father to join the Masons, and he couldn't deal with the aprons and then the secret handshakes.
Evolutionary psychology, as we mentioned, is one of your fields of expertise. There's an Australian comedian, a brilliant singer and comedian, Jordan Raskopoulos, and she told me once she was always surprised when she revealed to people that she was neurodiverse. And she goes, what do you mean? Why are you surprised that I'm neurodivergent? No, there's not suddenly lots of us here. We've always been here. Who the fuck do you think were the cartographers? Who could be bothered to sit down and write a dictionary by hand? And I'm wondering if over the course of your work, you've been able to see or identify how neurodivergence has played a role in how we got to now.
Well, it's it itself can be a controversial topic, one that you can get canceled if you say some of the wrong things, because people's identity gets tied up in being neurodivergent. I think it's a good thing that we recognize human variation. We're not all the same. I suspect that some categories like autism or even autism spectrum are probably being stretched to apply to people who are just introverted or obsessive compulsive. That I don't know about the situation in Australia, but there are actually some advantages to being diagnosed as, say, autistic or ADD. If you're a student, you get extra time on exams. You might get a room to yourself, to the point where 20% of Harvard students have a diagnosed disorder. Now, that is gaming the system. And I have students come into my office. I have a perfectly lively conversation with them. They're charming, they're funny, and they say, "Oh, by the way, I'm like autistic," and I think you are not autistic. At least you're not autistic in the same sense as the true, profoundly autistic kids that I have seen, who never learn to speak, for example, and never actually look at your face and make high-pitched noises and kind of writhe and twist in a chair and can't sit still. All of the symptoms of profound autism are just not on a spectrum with the kind of obsessive introverts that now call themselves autistic. Whatever you call them, it is good to recognize that not all people are clones of one another.
We talked about using common knowledge as a way, and common knowledge has been used to create division. It's used to sometimes create fear, particularly around election campaigns, certainly in America, certainly in Australia. What are some ways that leaders or communicators could generate common knowledge in a ways that brings cohesion and brings a society together with the idea of moving forward together?
Yeah, well, a skilled politician has to, for one thing, they have to kind of assemble a coalition. There aren't enough people who all agree about everything to give you a majority of the votes. I mean, people just have lots of opinions about lots of things. And so when we criticize politicians for being evasive, elusive, vague, we're kind of attacking exactly what they need to get elected, namely not to piss off sectors of the population that could make the difference between winning and losing an election. So of course politicians have to be vague and somewhat hypocritical. That's what it takes to win an election in a democracy. And I think a skilled leader can give people have enough of a common denominator that otherwise diverse people have a reason to vote for them. Ideally, they would, without pinning themselves down to something so specific that they'll alienate some sector or other, have enough of a common purpose, namely, for all our divisions, everyone would rather be, richer than poorer. Everyone would rather be safe than in danger. Everyone would rather have their kids go to good schools than to bad schools. Yeah. So a good politician can capitalize on what people really do have in common, while being vague enough about the more divisive things that they don't kind of shed them.
I don't want to get into it too much, but like I said, you're a person of profile. Often you come under attack, often with irrational arguments against you. You work on the Harvard campus. It's been a very interesting place over the last couple of years.
Unfortunately,
and you're also
I liked it better when it was a boring place.
Yeah, but you're also a human being, and I'm interested to know. The Stoics talked about even them, with all their thinking, they would still feel the animalistic flood of hormones through their body, the cortisol, and go, okay, just don't do anything for 20 minutes. What do you do when you find yourself incensed and that flood of feeling goes through your body and you feel your carotid arteries start to pulse? How do you handle it when you are kind of overwhelmed or really confronted?
Yeah, I try to organize my day-to-day life, so that no mature person can avoid unpleasant things in their career. You've got to read the criticism. You've got to know what people are saying about you. On the other hand, you do have, as you say, we are all human beings. We have emotional lives. It's never pleasurable to be attacked, even to be criticized. And so how do I reconcile those? Well, I have certain habits or guidelines. If I read something that I know is going to be, criticism, unpleasant, I'll do it in a case where it won't have spillover effects and ruin my day. I won't do it before going to bed, for example, where it'll keep me up. I don't even do it over a meal where I want to be able to digest. I'll do it at times when I've set aside time. Okay, now my workday has begun. I will process it, and then I also have other things to do afterwards, so I won't be obsessing about it the rest of the day. Or I'll read it on an airplane where I'm already miserable, cramped up in a little space. How much more miserable can I be? So like life hacks like that.
Yeah.
Or I'll follow it with something that I know will give me pleasure or relax me. That is, you want to respect yourself as a feeling being, but also be aware that you've got to handle some of the unpleasant things. Sometimes I'll remember the line from The Godfather where um, uh, it's said of Corleone, he wants to get his bad news right away. When Tom Hagen returns on the
Yeah.
flight to tell him that they won't sign up, Johnny Fontaine. Of course, he also made it easier by leaving a horse's head in the in the bed of the Hollywood mogul. So
I thought you were going to say my favorite one, which is from Godfather Part 2. This is the business we have chosen.
Yes.
I chose it. This is what I chose. I chose this life.
Don't ask me about my work, Kay.
I'll never ever ask you about work. But here I am asking you about your work. I listen to you speak, and I can see there's light in your eyes. You're a very vital person. Clearly, your brain is a big part of why you have your career. But without your body, you've got nowhere to go. How do you look after yourself, and what role does physicality play in your work?
Yeah, so I do. I do try to keep up exercise. In fact, I'm going to make a secret confession to you right now. It's not going to be secret for much longer. Where we hang up from this interview, I want to get in 30 minutes of exercise on the stationary bicycle. So I'm actually only wearing a shirt and tie from the waist up. I'm going to stand up now, and here's my bicycle shorts.
Yes.
Here's my bicycle shoes.
Yes, one of us.
So I think
I've got my Wahoo kicker in the other room.
Okay, so something else we have in common.
But this is really important because you can't. Your body needs these hormones to think properly. You need these things. You need to move your body to work properly.
You do, just for one thing, to keep. I find it hard to think deep thoughts while I'm exercising vigorously, and so being able to turn off that motor inside your head by just your energy being absorbed by your muscles is good, and it, of course, your health, your longevity. And I'll add something. This is there are lots of bogus ways of improving your memory, your mental functioning, staving off dementia. But one that I think almost everyone agrees on, and I asked one of my colleagues who's an expert in memory, is exercise is really good for your brain. That is, because it keeps your arteries open, keeps blood flow going. But it's also a way of just changing your mindset. I generally like myself, though it's winter here. It's a really, really, really cold day here in Boston, so I'm not going to take my bicycle outside. And so I will go on the stationary rollers. But in general, I like exercise that makes scenery go by. I'm not big for gyms. I like cycling. I like running. I like hiking. I like kayaking. So that as I exert myself, new things come into view. Scenery goes by. Now, it's not for everyone, but so for me, it's also a way just to physically experience the world at the same time as I'm contracting my muscles.
Well, Stephen, I know you are coming out to Australia for a tour, which I'm very much looking forward to. Please pack your bicycle shoes. I will organise a bicycle for you. You name how far you want to ride. I will get you a bike and we will go. And it will be glorious.
Deal, I'm going to hold you to that.
Oh, mate, you're on. Stephen, it's an absolute pleasure and an honour. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.